What's up, guys? I uh I am pretty sick this week. I've had a terrible cold the past few days, so before I get going, just forgive the low energy, but I will get through some of these questions. There's a lot of really good ones this week, but I am running on empty. All right. So there's a lot of questions about the brute in here today. So I'll go over some of those. There's also a lot of questions about tariffs. It was kind of interesting. I put up that video, I think on Thursday, about tariffs and DigiKey and all that kind of stuff. And it really opened up a lot of conversation. Got a little heated between some people. But I would love to give you some insight as to how we get affected by tariffs. Um, and then I'll talk about some other little fun projects that are coming down the road. But yeah, let's get going. So I have an email here from our buddy Jack. Uh, Jack asked 7 different questions here, and they actually kind of sum up what a lot of you guys asked. So I'm just going to follow this exact email. So first off, yes, about regen braking and whether or not it is possible or recommended, um, you know, on the brute and on the javelin, all that kind of stuff. So my thoughts on regen are it's a little bit of a hot take, I would say. Um, Regen is a great thing, especially on a car, so like a Tesla or some other, heavier vehicle. Regen does really almost nothing in terms of putting power back into a vehicle as small as a bike. But what it does do is allow you to reduce the wear on your brakes, which is kind of cool. We've actually done experiments in the past where I didn't even have a brake at all on Javelin, and we were just seeing if we could stop it just through regen. A little scary, but it's totally possible. But the reason I don't like regen on these bikes is because what it does to the motor axle. So when you activate regen or electronic braking, those are two slightly different things. Um, it will create like a rocking back and forth motion. That's the best way I can describe it to you. And so as you put power, your wheels going one way, and if you regen brake, well, now you're going to get a force going the opposite way. And if you do that tons and tons of times over the course of 1,000, 2,000, 3,000 miles, the axle nut will loosen up. And that's okay if you're like really cognizant of it, because you can periodically just tighten that up. But no one is ever cognizant of it. And it always gets to the point where, you're out on the road, and now your axle nut is loose and you're getting a huge amount of speed wobble because your back end is getting loose. So regen is one of those things where if you've got really bad brakes, you're just running like a, standard bicycle brake, it can be good. But for us, I prioritize putting motorcycle brakes on these bikes because they can actually stop all that added mass from the hub motor. So it is possible. I mean, you can go into your far driver settings right now on the Brute and on the Javelin, and you can activate it. You can see what it's like. I would just highly recommend you don't. Um, you know, I tested it over the course of 2 years, and I kept on coming back to the same conclusion that good mechanical brakes are better than regen braking. That's probably not true for every single bike, but for our bikes, it is definitely true. Next question is about security features. So this is something that's a really interesting topic because I come from a motorcycle background, and so do a few of our other team members. And on motorcycles, you have your key for your ignition, and that tends to be about it. Some bikes will have like a lockout on the fork where you can turn it, and that's cool, but those things break all the time. But it's really just like a key ignition and you go. And the whole e-bike industry has added all these other little special things onto it where if you touch your bike, it will kind of alarm, it will do all these different things. And these are all kind of like new features that are only really come onto the market as of like a few years. And the Javelin and the Brute, they don't have anything besides just a key ignition like a motorcycle does. You can take your battery out and bring it inside with you, which is, a big plus because a lot of the bikes in our categories of power, their batteries can be like physically mounted into the bikes. Um, and so one of the big things that we try to do is make that battery removable. But as of right now, it is just a key ignition. But I think I mentioned it maybe not the last one, but the one before that. I am working on adding an option to make the seat lock so that you can't get into the controller and all that other kind of stuff. It's a little tricky, and the problem is it's probably going to add a second key, which I don't really want to do, but it is something I could possibly do. Um, but yeah, the other feature is like the Far Driver does have an electronic lockout, but I don't like that because it's not a mechanical thing. If you turn your battery off or your battery is getting low, the Far Driver is going to need to pull power to activate those functions. And if your battery's not going, you're never going to have those features. So I tend to like to rely on mechanical things. So at the end of the day, my strong recommendation to you is just to get a really good lock. It's one of the reasons why we put all that storage capacity in Javelin. Um, Go get yourself a really high quality lock. Kryptonite is my go-to brand. Um, they have the Forget About It lock, and that one has a really good insurance policy on it. So basically, you get the lock, you register the lock, and it covers the cost of the bike up to a certain amount, depending on which lock you get. And that's probably your best bet. Another question is about brake adjustments. So I guess, maybe some of you guys are wondering how to bleed the brakes and things like that on these bikes. Brakes are one of those things that really kind of need almost like constant maintenance, especially on a bike as heavy as either the Javelin or the Brute. So you really need to be cognizant of your brake pad wear and how that's all going. Now, this guy's email says that he's getting a lot of squeezing, so he's maybe getting too much compression in his lever. So the brakes do use DOT fluid. Okay, so first off, you have to be a little careful when working with DOT fluid. Try to wear gloves. I'm pretty bad about wearing gloves, and every time I forget to wear gloves, I resent it because my hands are like irritated later on in the day. So wear some gloves, get yourself some DOT fluid, and then what you're going to do is you open up the lever. There's two Phillips screws on the top. Open that up, pour fluid in there, make sure it's topped off, cap it off again, and then go to your brake caliper. And on the brake caliper, you're going to see a bleeder. There's like a little bleeder port thing. And so what I like to do is I simultaneously squeeze the lever that needs to be bled. So you squeeze the lever, crack the bleeder. Then while you are still holding that lever down, close the bleeder again and then release, right? So squeeze, open, close, release. And if you do that, it will create a vacuum in the line, and it'll do a pretty good job of starting to pull out any air bubbles. And you might want to do that 2 or 3 times. Good idea is to put like a little rag around your brake caliper so you don't get DOT fluid all over your frame because it can chew up paint. But do that a few times. That tends to help out a lot. And yeah, that's the main trick. That's really, we've tried tons of different things, and that is the system. Try that out. Kickstand options. So yeah, The Brute uses a center stand, um, because the bike is pretty heavy and we wanted it to be able to be good for cargo and stuff like that. But it can be a pain in the butt to get on that center stand because it's so heavy. And he was wondering if there are any side stand options. The prototype Brute does have a side stand on it. And just so you know, that's not the only side stand we've ever put on that bike. And what I mean by that is they break just constantly. There's just like no good side stands right now. And you've probably seen me doing some work in the background, but I am working on a motorcycle grade side stand for e-bikes that mounts on the 40 millimeter dimension used on practically every e-bike. So it is something that we could try. If you want to do what we did on the Brute, you could give it a shot. Uh, that frame, like that swing arm, we just drilled holes in it. I just took a drill and I drilled 2 holes that were 40 millimeters apart and I mounted a kickstand on it. You have to realize that the Brute's frame is not thin. It is over 1/8 inch thick aluminum. It's crazy. You can actually drill it and tap the frame if you want. That's how thick the metal is. It's not like a regular bicycle frame. And you're really not going to affect the integrity of it because that frame is not a spherical frame. It's like an extrusion. So you'd be perfectly fine if you do want to drill 2 holes in it. Just be really weary about where you drill those holes, so that they are not too close to any welds. So that's something. The passenger foot pegs. So he's asking about, good placement for those. So the passenger foot pegs, it's a little bit tricky because this is something that we had to kind of come up with down the road after the bike was finished up. I'm not crazy about putting passenger foot pegs on these e-bikes. You can carry passengers and stuff no problem on motorcycles and things like that. But on these e-bikes, their geometries and stuff are really set up for single passenger. So even though you do see a lot of these companies putting passenger foot pegs on them, they really just put them on there just because people ask them. That doesn't necessarily mean the bike can actually handle it. So our bike can definitely handle it. Like the weight capacity on the Brute's no problem, but still it's going to be a tight fit. But if you want to mount them, they're designed to mount on the lower bolt of the shock. So if you go one at a time, so unthread the bolt that is holding on the shock. So it's the yoke portion. It's the kind of U-shaped portion, the lower one. Undo that bolt and then put the foot peg on the bolt and then put that into the shock. That will support plenty weight. That shock mount is crazy. It's like 1 inch thick aluminum. So that's where it goes. I could try to take a picture or something of where it is, but I think that's probably the confusion is like, where do you even put it? But that's where it goes. Suspension upgrades. So are there any shock upgrades? So right now, they're just standard motorcycle shocks. It's a 12.5 inch dimension. And so if you go online, like that particular dimension was set by Honda. And so there's tons and tons of different shocks that will meet it. You can go in and kind of adjust the compression on those shocks. There's not a ton you can do. But if you want, I can look around to see if there are any other shocks available. But yeah, just look up a standard motorcycle shock on the rear end. That design, it's like a very vintage design. They've been doing that since the 80s. And so you could probably hunt around and find something. Any future upgrades? So yeah, as you guys can probably tell, I'm always working on too many projects. This is my problem, is while I'm working on the main bikes themselves all the time, I'm also working on side projects. And I juggle back and forth to try to meet, all these questions and stuff that people have. But the main big thing that people are wanting for the Brute is more range. And, It's really funny because when I started working on the Brute, which was at this point like 2.5 years ago, almost 3 years ago, which is crazy. Um, we were selling the Bandit, and everybody on the Bandit was doing dual batteries. Like not everybody, but like 80% of the customers would order them with two batteries. And so I basically just said, all right, from the get go, I'm going to put a battery in the Brute that is going to be even bigger than two Bandit batteries. Nobody's going to need like more than that. And sure enough, within the time of me developing the Brute and getting all the design spec and all this kind of stuff, there were other companies putting crazy batteries and stuff, and you start to compare the Brute to other bikes, and it's like, well, why does this one have a 40 amp hour battery and this one has a 30, and why does this one have a 50 amp hour and that was a 30? And so the confusion comes from the fact that it's a total of watt hours. It's not just the amp hours. So if you calculate watt hours, you do that by multiplying the voltage of the battery times the amp hours, right? So if I do some quick math out, so a 48 volt battery with a 20 amp hour capacity is 960 watt hours. So you could run your motor at 960 watts for 1 hour, right? And now if I take our 72 volt battery, which is 30 amp hours, so this is comparing to the Bandit, right? That battery is 2,160 watt hours. So you could run your bike for 2,000 watts for 1 hour straight, So that is, let's see. Yeah, 2.25 times what the Bandit battery was. But still, people want more. And so this all comes back to these upgrades. And so I'm trying to develop a battery that you will be able to mount onto your Brute as well as onto the Javelin. So it'll be a secondary battery and it will fit both bikes. That's my objective, the design objective right now. And that's pretty much it. That's the whole deal. And the way it will work is I'm trying to develop a rack, so a rear rack, and it will hopefully mount underneath the rack so that you don't need to sacrifice your rack's capability, right? And you'll just be able to tether the batteries and be good to go. So you'll get a 75 to 80% range increase, which is a lot, So that's the big design objective for Brute. The long-term goal for Brute, my long-term project, is a trailer. So that's something that I'm kind of in early stages on, and I'll begin collecting user feedback on that. But one thing I've been waiting for the industry to develop, and it just continues to fall flat, is a flatbed trailer. There's tons of trailers out there that are, great, like child carrier trailers and stuff like that. But there's really like nothing that is just a flatbed. Like I want a flatbed that I can just bolt stuff to. I want to bolt a Tupperware container to it. I want to bolt a food cart to it, something like that. So that's the long-term goal, is to have that option. Yeah. So that's a few of those. Some other questions here is related to Brute and Javelin about off-road capabilities. So neither bike is really like, it's not a dirt bike. If you want something that's going to be going on trails and stuff, you should really get a dirt bike. But the Brute is definitely more set up to handle some like fire roads and gravel roads and stuff like that. Javelin has narrower tires. They're more efficient and they're designed for road usage. The Brute has a wider tire and it's going to be better for loose kind of gravelly stuff. But neither one is an off-road bike. Get a dirt bike if you want an off-road bike. We are really trying to design stuff for commuting and for utility use and stuff like that. Another question is related to hand guards and heated grips and stuff. So those hand guards are literally just like $30 things off Amazon. Like you can just go right on and look up dirt bike handguards, and they're right there. And then for heated grips, you can those are actually just Velcro on. They just Velcro on to the grip, and then you can run it through the 12-volt converter. So it's easy. Oh, I had a funny comment. A guy basically just said they love the looks of the sorry they love all the specs and stuff of the bike. They love the company, all that kind of stuff, and they're just wondering when we're gonna make a bike that looks good. And I I feel very much in the same way. And what I mean by that is we're such a small team. Um, we don't have the capabilities to do a lot of the fancy manufacturing methods that the big guys have. And so we have to kind of restrict what we can do realistically and make it consistently, right? So there's a bunch of trade-offs. Either you make something that looks beautiful and like outstanding, and it takes 4 times longer to make it and to finesse it with the tools that we have, at least, or you make something that looks like what the way our bikes look right now, and we can make it consistently, repeatedly, and we don't run into problems, and the quality of the ride is good, and all that kind of stuff. And then over time, we can keep on refining and refining and refining. So we're in a phase right now where we have proved that the Javelin, its concept, its frame building concept, is working. And we are now to the point where we were saying, okay, now let's focus on trying to improve the aesthetic as much as possible. And so I am working on making a series of major cosmetic upgrades to Javelin. And that will hopefully get us on a similar playing field to some of the bigger guys. Now, we're never really going to be to the point of like a Suron in terms of its frame elegance. The technology that's needed to make that frame is so crazy. And we're never going to have the ability to do these big injection molds for cosmetic panels and plastic parts and stuff like that. It's just like not what we do. So we have to be creative, and I'm really excited. That bike in particular, the Javelin, is going to be getting some nice cosmetic upgrades here pretty soon. And I'm hoping that a lot of those cosmetic upgrades will be transferable to older bikes too. That's one of the big objectives, is how do we make improvements on the bikes so that the people who bought bikes in the past can have access to those changes too. So we're getting close to that point. Just coming back to tariffs, a lot of people had really, really interesting thoughts on tariffs. I put that thing up about, is it worth it to put tariffs as a separate line item and stuff during checkout for some companies? I don't know. I think it's like a kind of interesting thought experiment. But tariffs will affect Spark, guys. It is just the nature of manufacturing. We are not going to get away from the fact that the motors on the bikes are from China. That's it. If you can supply me with an American motor manufacturer, please do that. The only people who are American companies selling motors are importing Chinese motors. That's it. It's really it. Until there's a manufacturer of that part, I'm never going to have an option. Batteries, while there are American battery makers, they are still using cells that are imported. So even those cells are going to have tariffs on them. We're never going to get away from this. And the biggest problem I have with it is the people's understanding of how tariffs work. And that's where I get really frustrated, because a lot of people think that the overseas companies are the ones that pay the tariffs, and they are not. I'm not trying to be political here, but the people who pay the tariffs are you and me. That's it. With the manufacturers, I pay the tariffs when we import those parts. They don't get off the shipping container until I pay those tariffs. And then those costs then get transferred onto the consumer. And one thing that can happen, which is not spoken about at all, is there are tariff reversals. So we have had an experience in the past here where a shipment that we imported, we paid tariffs on, and then 2 years later, we got a notification from our importer that said we were going to be credited for some of the tariffs that we paid. Well, guess what? You as a customer, you already paid those tariffs. And so that money is just going to come back to us. And so then we have to figure out, what are we going to do with that? Is that going to allow us to make our bikes cheaper, or are we going to put that money into development, or what happens? So the whole thing is really, really kind of confusing. And the bigger problem at the end of the day is the big picture. So while we're not going to get affected by tariffs as much as 99% of the other e-bike brands, right? So our total cost may go up 5 to 10% because of the parts that we use that are going to get at least a 25 to 40% tariff on them, right? Everybody else is going to get affected a lot more. That may make it so that our prices are in line with some of these other import bikes. And that's great for us in terms of competition, but it still comes back to the problem that at the end of the day, it means there's less money in your pocket because you are now paying tariffs on your groceries that you don't even realize are from other parts of the world. You're paying higher tariffs on your clothing, on all these other things. And that means you have less money, and it makes you less likely to even buy a bike in the first place. So while it does make competition with other e-bike brands more of a level playing field, on a broader scope, it makes the pool of who can even buy an e-bike much smaller. And that's what I worry about the most. I worry that over time, the people who are going to be interested in being able to get e-bikes just become smaller and smaller and smaller. And for us, what ends up happening is it becomes polarized. And what I mean by that is there will be a group of people who are very interested in super low cost bikes. So, $600 to $1,000 import bikes, because those will now be in the $1,500 range. Those will be the low cost. And then the high price bikes. And the people who are in the high price bikes are now going to start to shift over to motorcycles, right? Because why would you buy a $6,000 e-bike when you could buy a $5,000 Yamaha? Like, it's this kind of crossover. And I understand people just want e-bikes for a different reason than just going fast. People want it for the practicality of it and being under the radar and stuff like that. But there's a lot of complication to all this. And so we'll see what happens. But on first glance, it looks like tariffs would help us as an American manufacturer, but I truly believe they will not, unfortunately. I think they will make a serious negative impact on us. But I hope I'm wrong. So we'll see. All right. And so with all that, let's talk about some fun stuff. So the biggest thing that I think I'm working on right now that just came in is I got a motor from Powerful Lithium. I just put that little video up on Instagram on Friday, but I got an 8 kilowatt motor, and I'm really excited about that. It's going to go onto a Javelin. We're going to do a little experiment. We're going to see how that goes. It's going to be twice the power of the current motor on the Javelin. So I don't know what to expect. I'm never interested in making like a wheelie machine. That's not my thing. That's not Spark's thing. We're not wheelie guys. Respect for it, but we are about making a super high quality suburban commuter bike with really good, reliable parts on it in a really smooth ride. So that 8K motor is going to be an interesting experience for us to see how things go when it doubles power. But we'll see how that goes. Powerful Lithium, it's such a great group, and I'm excited to do some more collaboration work with them. And the big thing about that motor is if you go to our website, I haven't put out a video about this because I'm kind of soft launching it, but you can now buy the Javelin as a kit. And the way that works is you can buy the entire bike painted how you like, headlight to what you want, controller set up to what you want. All the stuff is there ready to go, with the exception of a motor and a battery. And so if you like the idea of an American made frame, It's really high quality parts on it. It's going to last. It's designed to be able to go fast. It's not just like an e-bike that was designed to go 20 miles an hour. You can now buy that bike, get your own battery, get your own motor, and you're good to go. The dropouts are 150 millimeter. I am going to start looking into having a dropout option for 175s and for 200s. That's going to take me a little while to develop that. But for now, there's plenty of motors, tons of motors that meet that 150 millimeter dropout, and tons of controllers and screens and stuff that will work with all that stuff. So if you go to Spark's website now, you can buy that kit. And what's really cool is I'm fairly opposed to the whole throwaway culture that has developed over the past few years. And by offering this kit, you now have the ability to take the battery and motor that you have used on maybe a different bike. Maybe you built like a crazy high-powered e-bike, right? And you get it all together and you're like, oh man, this is kind of squirrely. Like I get up to 50 miles an hour, I'm getting crazy shake on it. I don't think I'm safe on this. Well, you don't have to throw everything away. Just take the motor and take the battery that was on that bike and put it onto one of our frames, and you're on your way. So I think that's a pretty exciting option. I'm going to be putting up some more marketing for that soon, but that's something that I think could help a lot of people. So go check that out. And then probably the two final things I'd like to go over really quick are we're going to be adding a lot of events. We're going to do a lot of events over the next 5 to 6 months. So I'm going to start to put them up on our website. But I'm going to start doing classes. So you'll be able to actually come to Spark. And I'm going to have classes where you can come learn different skills. And they're not all going to be related to bikes. So that's going to be kind of fun. We're going to be doing some interesting things, like I'm considering doing things like a Battle of the Bands or a maker fair at our facility, all these different things. I really want there to be people come into the shop that maybe are not directly interested in what we're doing, and they come and see what we do and they're like, oh man, this looks like a lot of fun. So keep an eye out. We're going to start to do some events. And then the last thing is I'm going to be adding on a section to the website where you will be able to schedule basically one-on-ones with me. So if you have specific builds that you're working on and you're really stuck, you'll be able to schedule a meeting with me. And you'll also be able to schedule a consultation on a build. So if you have a particular idea in mind for a javelin or a brute or something like that, and there's just too much information, and we're getting to the point now where we're like 30 to 40 emails deep, which happens a lot, you can just come to Spark and I will sit down with you. And like, for example, these are all paint swatches. So like I got like 100 different paint swatches. I can show you all the different paint options we can do. I can show you all the different headlights in person. You can take a bike for a ride. I can go out with you and we can compare the Javelin and Brute. So you'll be able to schedule a visit and we can go from there, because we've been getting a lot of people wanting that. Like I've had people fly across the entire country, guys, to sit down with me for like 2 hours and spec out their bikes, which is amazing. That's like a huge honor that somebody would even think to do that for a company like ours. It is like, wow, that's crazy. But there's obviously a lot of people that want to do that. And so I want to present that option. And not only that, but we are trying to get set up still with that shop in California. And when that shop in California gets set up, we are trying to set that up so it will also be like a boutique kind of experience where you can go to them. They will also have all the different paint swatches, all the different headlights and everything. So you can sit down with them and they will spec out the entire bike to your design as well. So that's going to be really exciting. But I think that's it for me today, guys. I am about to fall asleep. I still feel like crap. But if you have any more questions, they don't have to be about our bikes. I welcome any other brands. So if you got a Super 73, if you got a Juice bike, an Onyx, a Suron, whatever it is, you can ask questions about that. I'm happy to answer questions about it. Just leave them down below. and I will do my best. All right. Thanks, guys.